Kubernetes and CKAD tips number 34. In this, I'm going to talk about few general kubectl tips which will help you during the practice and the exam to figure out some things which is not known and obvious to you, because it is so vast that it's not possible for one person to remember everything. But you should know the tricks and tips, the secret of the thread to really do things most efficiently. And as this is an open book exam, you still have the ability to search in the official documentation, but at times it might be time taking, so finding things quickly is also important. So let's see how we can find some of the tips which I wanted to share with you. Okay, so let me share my screen, and then I'm running the minikube. And first thing first, I always use, and I don't use the full kubectl as a word. So I create an alias. So you can do that also, and it will make your things faster. So if you say that cube alias k kubectl, next time if you type k, it basically types the kubectl on behalf of you. Quite convenient, because you are reducing a lot of character typing which you need to frequently type again and again. So use alias and use the alias k, which is most convenient way of typing things. Now the next thing is that you need to make sure that you are in the right context. That is absolutely important. So how do you find which context you are in? So you can say k, that is kubectl config. If you see that, then there it shows you the list of subcommands, right? You can see that what is the current context. To view that, you can use this view subcommand. If you say k config view, it will show you all the context you have, and the current context says minikube. So we are right now in the right context. However, if you have a lot of context, it will be very difficult to view. So you can use this subcommand called get context. And if I, instead of saying view, and if I say get context, you'll see that list of context will come, and with a star indicating that you are in the current context. So it's basically better readable because it's a tabular in format. So we are in the right context. So the exam question comes with specific context details, so you should always be switching to that context, right? Another way thing is that if you are, let's say, working on a specific namespace, and then you want to continue working on that namespace, you probably need to give that namespace detail again and again. For example, if I create a new namespace, so if I say create NS Riju, and that namespace will get created, right? And then if I have to create a container within that namespace, what I need to do, krun busy image busy box and namespace Riju, because by default the namespace is the default, right? So I am always, so if I have to read that pod, if I say this, then it will show you all the pod but not the pod you are working on. So these are all coming from the default namespace. However, I want to see the pod which I just now created in the namespace. Either you can say n Riju, so that's also shorter form. Then you can see the pod showing up in the list, because you need to explicitly tell that, hey, I'm working on the namespace. If that is the case, you can always define the context. So if you say config, and then if you see the sub commands available, right, and then you have something called set context. Now one of the sub command, which is set context, helps you set the context. And what is the context you want to set? You want to set the current context, because we are right now in the context of minikube. And then you have something called, now let me just show you the help command. You can see that there is a command called namespace. So if you do that, what happens, dash namespace. If I do this, then context minikube is set to a default namespace as Riju. Now if I say k get pod, you will see the pod coming from the Riju namespace. If I k create a k run busy 2, image busy box, and the second busybox pod got created if I say CKAD. So you can see that second pod is showing up. So I don't have to explicitly mention which namespace I'm in. To view the namespace, you can say A. That's all namespaces. So it basically shows you all the objects got created in all the namespaces. So you can see that there are default namespace, right? A lot of things in the default namespace, and in the redo namespace I have got two pods. So that basically shows you namespace and the object, right? So we basically can go ahead and delete a namespace. So if you, let's say k delete prod, if I do that, there is nothing called this, and I say namespace prod. Now this namespace deletion is really helpful because it not only deletes the namespace but also all the object created within the namespace. So if you run the previous command to show up all the namespaces, you will not find the prod namespace anymore in this list, right? We have the default, we have the Kubernetes names cube system, and then we have the namespace called redo, right? So you don't see the namespace and its content anymore. So it's very easy. So if you are working on a namespace and you're working for a longer time and you're done with it, you just go ahead and delete the namespace and everything will be deleted from that, right? So I just wanted to set the context back to, let's say, the default. Okay, now what I want to do is that I want to just kconfig set bit slow over here. Sometime remote machines are a bit slow. So I'll say that, hey, you know what? I want to set the context of this thing, and I say namespace equals to default. Okay. So that means that I'm switching back to the default namespace, and I need to basically give this. You can see that it's putting in the wrong space. Okay, now I'm good. I can run this and it sets back to the default namespace. There's a spelling mistake in the namespace. You can now easily identify that as PACE. So that's why this command did not execute. So let me just quickly add the correct value. It's just taking a bit longer because of the speed of internet, because I'm using a remote machine. So let me just say this, and then default namespace is modified. Now if I say kcat pod, it will show me the list of pod from the default namespace, and I can just say k delete deploy, and then I say nginx2, and that's gonna go ahead and delete the deployment and its pod created, right? So you will find a lot of pod which will get cleaned up because I cleaned up a deployment, and the part of the deployment is, you can see that it's all of them are getting terminated, right? That's what I wanted to do. So I am right now in the default namespace. Now what happens when you create a pod, right? There is a level of validation which happens at the top level. So it checks the syntactical thing, but it doesn't really, and then it accepts, the API server accepts that and makes an entry in the backend data source, that is etcd, etc. that doesn't mean that your pod is rightly created. So just to give you an example, okay? So if I say k run, that's how you create a pod through kubectl run. And then you say give a name as busy22, okay? And then here in the image, notice here, busy box 1. There is no image called busy box 1. So that's definitely is not the right one. But if I go ahead and create, you can see that the output shows that it got created. Okay. But there could be a problem, right? That's what you need to identify. How do you know that there is a problem? You say k get pod. It'll show you all the pods. And you can see that the pod busy2 has got error image pool, right? That means there is some issue. We don't know yet what exactly the issue is, but something related to image. To know more about that, what you can do, you can say k describe and then say pod, the type of the object, and you say busy22. If you do that, then you can see at the bottom of this, there are errors, warnings, and things like that. So you can say that it's failed, and it's failed to pull the image busy box 1, right? Does not exist or may require Docker login. So it is not always true that this image does not exist. Might be you are trying to pull an image which is a private image. You might have given the right name, but the login requires you to provide that details. So how do you do that? So all these things you need to fix. So you can fix them, right? You can basically modify an existing object. Either you can delete the whole object and recreate it, or you can modify an object. And to modify an object, what you can do, you can say k edit pod busy22. Some of the property value can be modified, not all of them can be modified. So in this case, we can try to see if we can modify this image value, right? So the image should be busy box, which I modified just now, and then I just came out. If the thing is accepted, that means I am allowed to modify that field. Now if I say k get pod, you will find the pod is status completed because there is nothing much to happen, so it did not do anything more, but it is not having that error anymore. So you know that error could be because of that. You can even go inside a running pod, right, and then see what is happening. So for example, the second pod, which is Nginx, which is still running because it's a web one, it is running. So what I can do, I want to get inside the pod. Now this holds only one container, and to know whether you have one or more container, you can always go and say k get k describe pod nginx, and then if you do that, you will find that it has got a containers section which tells you about the container details. So right now we have only one container, and that's all about the same container. So we only have one container. So if you have more than one container in a pod, you need to explicitly specify the container name to get inside. Otherwise, if that container pod holds more than one container, if the first container will be logged in. But if you need to go to the other container, you need to explicitly tell. If the pod has only one container, then it will automatically land you to that container. So to get inside a container, you can say k, that is kubectl exec, okay, and then the name of the pod, that is nginx. Okay, this is the name of the pod, and if you have to mention the container, you use this -c. Otherwise, you say interactive terminal IT, that will open TTY, and then you type something like sh. That's a shell command. Now if you say ls, you are inside that pod, and you can see that it basically holds this folders, etc. You can even change things, come out, and it is not persistent change, right? But you can go browse through, read, and then check things. If there is any specific thing you need to do at the application level debugging, if the logs are getting stored in a folder, you can read those logs, etc. Right? One of the other things I want to also talk about quickly is that what happens when you create a pod. So you can say k get logs of nginx, and you can see that what all happened in that. So if you say k logs minus h, it will help you with the possible options. Now you can see that you can get the logs of pod, right, for all the containers. If you want to specify a specific container, you say see the container name, right? You can do 20 different things, right? Last 1 hour's log, only 20 lines, most recent line. So if you have many logs, let's say in the container, you can filter them out. And this example really talks about how do you read those logs. So basically it is k logs and the pod name, and you can see that this is the log I'm getting. If I say that logs busy 22, okay, that's a busy box pod, do not have any logs at this point in time, right? K get log pods, it is crashed back off, so there is no log at this point in time which is coming up. Now one of the other things which I wanted to also show you is that when you create, let's say, something which keeps changing, for example, you want to monitor the thing, so you get to see certain detail level of details by saying k get pods, right? You see that. But if you need to know a little more more than what you get here, so if I say k get pod, and then if I say w output, that is output wide, if I use that, then it spans a little more. It shows you the IP address, which node it is, right, etc, etc. So you can see that because I have only one node, all my pods are getting created within the node, so I can see that details. If, let's say, pods are getting created, deleted because of some external activity happening, for example, let's say I want to, it's in connecting the same minikube thing. So if I say k create deploy nginx image nginx dash replicas 10, if I run that, and side by side, if I see that the pods will get created. But if you do, let's say, k get pod, it'll only show the current status. So if you say k get pod, it'll show you all the pods which is currently running. However, I want to make it a watch mode, which means that as and when pod status changes, it will show up in the list. Now if I do run this command, you will see that the pod status constantly changing. So it is saying that it went into a pending state, it is right now in the container creating state, right now it is in the running state, right? And you can see that eventually there will be 10 pods which will be running against this deployment, because I said that deployment will have 10 replicas. Now let's say if I kill this deployment, I say k delete deploy nginx, okay. If I delete that, that means it will start deleting all the pods. So you can see that the state is showing terminating, right? And once they are all terminated, right, so it shows you as and when for any pod which is getting changed, right, the status is getting changed, because Kubernetes is an orchestration engine. A lot of thing happens on behalf of the end user, right? So the deployment is one such thing. You don't create pod, you create deployment, and deployment controls the pod and checks the health status. Let's say if you kill a pod and then if you, let's say, do the deployment. So for example, in this case, if I do this deployment again and make only 3 copies, okay, let's just have a declutter everything. So you can see that 3 container got created and 3 of them running. Now let's suppose I want to delete this pod, right, explicitly. Now deployment is watching over this pod and then it will recreate the whole pod. So if I say k delete pod and then the pod name, it's gonna go ahead and start deleting. So you can see that a container creating kick-started, right, and then one is getting terminated, but it got replaced by the new container which is k6ktz. right? That's the new container because I explicitly terminated this container. So as soon as the deployment noticed something happened wrong with pod due to any reason, because this time I did it forcefully, but due to any reason, if anything happens, the deployment will kickstart another container. So make sure that the number of replicas I asked for is always available for the end user. That's the beauty of deployment, right? So you can see that it's got terminated, and then it will be deleted once the new pod is up and running. So that's how it basically happens. A lot of time what happens when you create by mistake a pod which you need to delete, and sometimes the pod deletion may take longer, right? For example, in this case, if I come out of this and then say that I want to delete this pod, I say k delete pod, right? One of the things is that I can wait here, right, for the pod to get deleted, or I can run something like a grace period. Now, one of the things in the delete, along with the force command, right, you can use force, but if you use the force command, by default it is false, right? If you say force equals true, then it becomes true. You need to also mention the grace period. That means you say that grace period is 0. That means a period of time in seconds, right, given the resource terminate gracefully, right? So if you, let's say I did a mistake, I don't want this pod anymore, so why to really have a grace period? By default there is a grace period, right? So it is not immediate, so it waits and then decides. So it takes a long time sometimes. So how do you make sure that you can make it faster? By saying the k delete pod, and then you say the pod name, and I say force equals to true, and then you say grace period equals to 0. Okay, if you do that, sorry, I don't need this true thing. It's immediately deleted, right? If you happen to see, like, if I, let's say by any means, if I have a pod which I, let's say k get pod, yeah, so if I, let's say, try to delete this nginx without grace, now what happens if I, let's say I go ahead and delete this? Now you have noticed the experience with grace period equals to 0 and force command, right? Switch, and then you see that it waits for some time, and sometimes this some time can be longer. So you do want to probably delete things. Now, one of the other things I wanted to really briefly touch on is how you get the help of the command. So a lot of time, you know that I have used -h, which is a help command, and this CLI, which I have used many different CLIs, the Kubectl CLI is the best documented CLI I have ever used. So most of the things you can get from the help command, built-in help command. So for example, if I say kubectl run, which is basically to run create a pod, and if I say h without typing anything, you not only get to know what all different options you can provide, but also it gives you some samples. Like if you see on the top, right, you can see that there are samples available. You can even copy the whole sample and paste it and run it to see thing are like minus thing. So it basically does that. Now, one of the other things which I wanted to quickly touch on is how do you get to know about, let's say, the details about it. So for example, there is a very nicely friendly command, k explain, okay, and then if I say pod and then say spec, no, dot spec, you can see that what all different values or things you can set inside that thing, right? So you can see that it's a list of things, right? So you can put things, so you can go in a hierarchical mode, like if you want to see how to say active deadline, seconds, or affinity, or container. So what is there inside a container? For example, if you want to see that, you can just say that pod.spec.containers. Okay, so if you do that, then it shows you list of things you can put inside the container. So these are the YAML thing you can do, right? Because not everything can be done through Kubectl, but most of the things can be done. But if you have to do, let's say, YAML definition, for example, this from, so you need to know how that from works. So if you say that, hi, this from is fine, container, I want to load the environment from some file or something, right? How do I do that? So it refers config map, it takes the secret, right? It takes the prefix. For example, all of them and from I can probably use in my container sub area. So with this, I want to end. I will continue giving you tips because it's endless, but it is all about making yourself comfortable with the kubectl command and finding the things quickly as possible. Hope you enjoyed this, and thank you very much for watching.